Today, I will be demonstrating how to map a cemetery both manually and graphically. There are a few reasons why you would need to map a cemetery. You could be creating a permanent record for a town, church, or private property owner. You could be asked to pinpoint unmarked or possibly vacant burial sites to help visually locate them in proximity to marked sites. You could even use the information in photographs to complete the entries on findagrave.com or ancestry.com. The items you're going to need to map a cemetery are 20 fiberglass rods, 2 300-foot nylon rope spools, 3 100-foot measuring tapes, and these 3 items are available at most home stores, a camera and extra batteries. A half-acre site takes approximately 8 hours. You may also use a smartphone or mobile device, but you'll need to download the photos for visual reference later. A small whiteboard with erasable markers, and a notebook with pre-drawn squares representing a 10-foot by 10-foot grid segment. Let's begin laying out our grid. Start by visually looking for a pattern in the placement of the grave markers. If they appear to be in rows, you can use that as a guide to establish the grid layout, parallel or perpendicular to the markers. If the grave markers are randomly placed, you can just begin at any location and build the grid to include those markers. The first thing you will want to do is establish a starting point for the grid. My suggestion would be to find a permanent item, such as a cemetery lot corner marker or a fence post, something that you can come back to in the future if necessary. From this point, we need to create a 50-foot by 50-foot square to begin laying out our grid. Mathematically, if each side is 50 feet, then the cross-corner measurement is 70 foot 9 inches diagonally. This first line establishes the rest of the entire project, so you'll want to make sure that all the grave markers are located to one side of the measuring tape, inside the grid area. If the measuring tape is overlapping any markers, reposition the line until they are cleared. We begin by placing the first corner rod. Attach the ends of 2 measuring tapes to this rod, one for you and one for your assistant. Grab 3 more rods and the 3rd measuring tape and begin walking parallel to the rows of grave markers to locate the 50-foot point. Set the 2nd corner rod. Now begin walking perpendicular to the 2nd rod. Your assistant will meet you using the 2nd measuring tape. Together, you are going to find the point where your 100-foot mark and their 70-foot 9-inch mark meet. Set the 3rd corner rod at this intersection point. Be aware you may need to lift the measuring tapes over grave markers to get an accurate diagonal line. Now you must do the same process to locate the 4th corner. Attach the end of the 3rd measuring tape to the 3rd corner rod and begin walking 50 feet perpendicular to corner number 3. Have your assistant attach their measuring tape to the 2nd corner rod. This time you will both be meeting where the 50-foot mark and the 70-foot 9-inch mark intersect. This will be your 4th corner. To test the accuracy of your layout, continue to walk back to the 1st corner rod. The distance between the 4th and the 1st corner rods should be exactly 50 feet. The next step is easy. Take the remaining 16 rods and place one at each 10-foot interval along the perimeter. The last step of laying out the grid is to take your ropes and string them between all the rods. Now that you have your grid in place, you will want to take photos of each grid square so you'll have a visual record to refer to later when you're drawing out your map. Each grid square is assigned an identification. For ease of reference, I would recommend using a system of letters and numbers, the first row being A, with the first grid square being 1, followed by A2, A3, and so on. If the cemetery is larger than 50 foot by 50 foot, you would simply set out the next 50 by 50 grid off the first one and continue the identification designations. Using the whiteboard, write the corresponding grid identifier. Take a photo of the grid square, being sure to capture all 4 sides in your photo. I would suggest holding the camera high to get the best viewpoint. Now, in your notebook, draw squares to represent each grid section and add the placement of the elements within each grid square. Besides the grave markers, you'll want to note lot cornerstones, upright markers, flush ground markers, vegetation, and any unmarked burial depressions visible on the ground. Be sure to include the names and dates of each grave marker. Once you have completed documenting the entire grid, you may need to repeat the steps to extend the map to the next section. You can simply leave the rods between corner 2 and corner 3 because they will become the new corner rods for 1 and 4. Use the 50-foot, 50-foot, 70-foot, and 9-inch method to place the far corners and reset the rods at every 10-foot interval. Your goal is to archive as much information about the cemetery as possible, so you'll want to also photograph each grave marker individually after you've removed the grid ropes. Be sure to look at all sides of the grave marker for inscriptions. These images will historically record the condition of the grave markers at the time of mapping and may also be uploaded to Find a Grave and Ancestry.com, where they will reside forever on the internet. The last phase is to create the cemetery map. You can use a graphics program such as Adobe Illustrator or Microsoft PowerPoint, or you can simply draw out your grids on a large piece of paper that can be photographed later for archiving. Begin by placing the elements as they appear in each grid square, such as grave markers, corner markers, trees, ground depressions, etc. Include as much information as you can. Having the names available on the map makes it easier to locate when out in the cemetery. Depending on the size of the cemetery, you may want to use a different convention, such as a numbering system for each grave marker on the map that corresponds with a spreadsheet created in Excel. You can take it one step further by estimating burial site positioning and using a color code system that identifies occupied, possibly occupied, or vacant sites. The final result is a map that identifies every visible element within the cemetery. This map will become a valuable resource to caretakers, researchers, and the public. That's the entire cemetery mapping process. If you have any questions, please contact the Coalition to Protect Maryland Burial Sites at mail@cpmbs.org. Thank you.